Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Strand. My name is Kate. I work in the events department here. One thing I want to just let you all know is that we do have a television crew here filming for RLTV, which is a Baltimore-based television program. So they're not going to be pointing the cameras into the audience, but just so you know, if you walk in front of them, if you don't want to be on television at all, don't walk in front of the cameras. So that's all. So tonight, I'm thrilled to introduce the celebrated comic artist, Aline Crumb. She's contributed to numerous comics, including Twisted Sisters and Dirty Laundry Comics, which is a comic about the Crumb family. For several years, she was editor of Weirdo, which is a leading alternative comics anthology. And this evening, she's going to talk about her recent book that she did with R. Crumb, Drawn Together, which is a collection of the work that they've done together and an account of their marriage, sex life, and more. In conversation with Aline, we have John Heneghan, who is a musician and record collector. He plays with the E Street River String Band, which Robert Crumb also often plays with. Besides being a musician, he knows an enormous amount about comics and the Crumb's work. So if you could all join me in welcoming Aline and John.
Okay. Well, hello.
Hi, everybody. It's a nice small group, so we're not nervous. And we can really get raunchy.
So, Aline.
John will keep it very proper.
Yes, I have very high standards for what we talk about here. It's not going to get...
Unlike me.
We're going to keep it clean. So would you like to talk about growing up in Queens, where it all started for you?
Sure, especially after my Sandy story. You know, I think I have to talk about that because, you know, I was nice and safe and sound in France when Sandy came, and I thought, haha, you know, it's a good thing I got out of there. And then once I found out that all my friends and people I love were safe, I started to just be curious about how this would affect me or not affect me. And I found out that the house I grew up in was destroyed in that fire in Queens. And that was the second time that house was destroyed, because the first time it was destroyed, it got hit by an airplane right after 9/11. 2 months later, a flight that was on its way to Dominican Republic crashed into the house. It killed the people living in the house that bought the house from my family. And then it was resold, rebuilt, and now it was destroyed a second time. So, you know, even though I don't live here and I left here over 40 years ago, I can't escape being like touched by this place. So anyway, that goes back to my very early origins. But I actually grew up in the 5 towns on Long Island for my later years, which was like a prison sentence for me. You know, at age 8, I realized I was an alien, somehow dropped among these people, and the only thing that saved me was drawing and painting and reading. I totally escaped from, you know, the barbarian hordes around me. And so that's how I started drawing comics, and in a way I started not drawing comics, but writing, making notes, making humorous things, just trying to make sense out of something that was completely crazy to me. And, you know, I had a calendar when I was in high school. I marked X's on it till my time was up and I could get out. And I left the day I got out of high school, and I never went back, and life has been progressively better ever since. So that's all I can say. But it gave me great material, because for years I wrote about that early childhood growing up and how alienated and miserable I was. It gave me so much material. And now, you know, I'm sort of not writing about that anymore. Finally, at age 64, I feel like I've left Long Island. But it's taken a while.
So how old were you when you started drawing?
I started drawing when I was 8. That's when I first became conscious that I was an alien and that I had to do something. And so that's when I started, you know, seeking refuge in some form of expression to maintain my sanity. And I was a good painter at that age. I could copy famous paintings. and that really pleased my relatives. So they put me in like art school, and I would copy famous paintings, and my relatives would like throw money at me and take the paintings. And that's when I realized, hey, this is a good gig, you know. So kind of like planted the idea that maybe I should pursue this as a career. But it really was, you know, the thing that saved me. And I drew all through high school, and you know, and then I went to art school, and that kind of turned me off to doing art, because it was like I went to Cooper Union, and it was very competitive and scary, and that kind of made me not want to be an artist. So for a while I just took drugs. But then later I eventually went back to doing art when I, you know, recovered from my major brain damage, and I went back to doing art again. So anyway.
Did you read comics as a kid, or when did you get introduced to them and start to be interested to draw comics?
No, I didn't read comics as a kid because my parents wanted me to be a refined person so that I could marry like an orthodontist and live in Great Neck rather than the Five Towns. So I had to take ballet and play the violin and, you know, read literature and stuff like that. So no, I wasn't, they kept comics away from me. So the first comics that I really was influenced by were underground comics. And I was an art student and in the 60s, and I saw comics, and I was really amazed by the vast creativity and honesty and raunchiness and everything, and the freedom, you know, and I saw a way that I could express myself. And actually the first comic that really influenced me was called Binky Brown Meets the Holy Virgin Mary by Justin Green. He was actually the first autobiographical cartoonist. People think that I was, but it was him. And he influenced me incredibly. He was half Jewish and half Catholic, and he had the neurosis of both to the maximum. He still is one of the most neurotic people I've ever met. Drawing and writing about all that stuff has not helped. Hi, how are you? Oh, sorry, fine. Anyway, so, you know, it wasn't therapeutic for him at all. He's as neurotic as ever. But that comic really gave me a way to see how I could tell my story. It gave me a little window into a way of working, and that influenced me more than anything. And, you know, there were other great cartoonists like Aline Crumb also, but he was such a good artist that I couldn't really relate to it. You know, it was like that was on another realm that I could never aspire to. But Justin Green's work was really crazy, eccentric, and the drawing was all scratchy and weird, and I really could relate to that. So that was the first thing that gave me an inspiration.
And were you already in San Francisco at that time when you found those comics?
No, I was actually in Arizona, being a Jewish cowgirl and eating peyote cactus, and some cartoonists came to visit Arizona, and since my last name was Kominsky, and my husband had drawn a character called Honey Bunch Kominsky, they all remarked about how much I looked like this character, and I had the character's name, and they all thought I should meet Robert Crumb, who was their friend. So anyway, I moved to San Francisco at that time and got introduced to Robert, and you know, I got involved in the whole art scene, comic scene in San Francisco. It was like 1970.
What was that like? Who introduced you? How did you get involved in it? Was it a difficult thing to meet all those people and get involved in comics back then, or was it still just kind of like an underground thing?
It was a total, like, sort of open, random, chaotic, hippie mess, and these women who were, like, you know, starting to become rabid feminists were trying to put together a first women's comic, and they were just looking for pages to fill up this comic because there were no women cartoonists. So anybody that could, like, you know, draw lines on a page and fill it up with anything could get in. That was the standard. You know, so they accepted me, and then we still needed more pages, so I was on the bus going over there one day, and I saw someone drawing in a sketchbook, and I looked over there. I said, "Do you want to draw comics?" And she said, "Yeah, why not?" So she came off the bus, and that was Diane Newman, who went on to do Twisted Sisters with me. So that's how it was in those days. Anybody could get published, basically, you know, and it was wide open, and, you know, anything went. And when I look back at those books now, they're really terrible, like, because there were no standards, and, you know, everyone was high, and it was like a mess, and nobody could draw. Most people didn't even know how to, like, make straight lines and draw in legible penmanship. It was like the most basic things were not there, you know. So it was pretty bad. And then, but that freedom was also a wonderful thing, and I feel I was very lucky to have started drawing in the underground like that, because you could do whatever you wanted. And, you know, we're so spoiled that now we have normal publishers, and they have lawyers and things. things, and they say we can't do certain things, we're like outraged, you know. So I'm glad I was young then and I could start doing that then. So I got involved in that, and then Spain Rodriguez, who was also one of the Zap artists, introduced me to Robert at a party. He was actually responsible for bringing us together because he thought I looked like a Crumb character and I should meet him. And, you know, when I met Robert, he had a wife and a girlfriend, but he still really had the hots for me too. So, you know, that was this 1970, and, you know, the rules were different, and it was really crazy, and we lived through a lot of chaos together in those days, but it was fun.
Were you long divorced from your first husband at that time?
No, I don't even know if I was divorced from my first husband yet, but I was separated from him. And the last thing in the world I wanted was to be involved in another monogamous relationship. I was actually having fun for the first time in my life. I had a cool apartment, I had a job, I had a roommate, I had tons of boyfriends. It was like San Francisco. It was the greatest time of my life. I did not want to be in a serious relationship, but that is not what happened. I ended up falling into this serious relationship, and, you know, somehow you meet someone and your destinies are intertwined. You sort of know that, and you kind of get a sinking feeling if it's not really what you want at the time, but I got this sinking feeling that this was something that was going to last, and I was going to be sucked in and involved in this long-term thing, and in fact, that's what happened.
So when did you get your first comic published just on your own? What was the first one, and when did that happen?
That was Women's Comics #1, and I had a character called Goldie, a neurotic woman, which of course was just me, as it's the only thing I know how to draw. And that was published in 1971, right when I first got to San Francisco. And I kept working for all the women's comics after that, pretty much, until I broke away from that group and started working on Twisted Sisters with Diane Newman. We were like the bad girls of the group, and we broke away from the group because we liked boys and we liked sex, and the other women thought we were like Uncle Toms. We were not feminists because we liked to be sexy and liked to have boyfriends and flaunt it, and on our own terms, but nevertheless, this created a big kind of schism in the original group. So, and I felt that some of these militant feminists were humor impaired. So I decided that, and Diane and I decided that, you know, we had more in common. We were going to do the bad girl book, which was Twisted Sisters. So, and I do think that in the long run holds up better than the women's comics, I have to say. Anyway.
So tell us the story about how you and Robert first came to draw together.
Okay, well that was, I think it was in about 1973. We were living in a hippie commune in Northern California with his ex-wife, their kid, her boyfriend, their kid, me, and I don't know, a few other hangers-on, and a lot of dogs and other things like that. And then Robert was playing in a band called the Cheap Suit Serenaders, and they would go on tour sometimes, and Robert would, like, you know, meet girls on these tours, and one of these girls that he met packed up all her belongings and showed up at the commune and thought she was going to live happily ever after there, which didn't make me very happy. So I had a big fit, and I ran out of the house, and I fell and broke my leg. So, and then I went to the emergency room, came back with a cast on, and when I came back, fortunately, the girl was gone. So anyway, Robert got her out of there before I killed her. And but then it was a very rainy winter, and I was stuck in the house with this cast, and I was starting to drive him crazy. So he said, let's do a comic together. Like, so I used to do these with my brother when we were kids. So he started drawing. He said, all right, I'll draw myself and you just respond. And we just started doing it totally just to relieve the boredom. And we worked on that for a while, and we had no intention of publishing it. It was strictly for ourselves, and it was really meandering. It wasn't very coherent, and we didn't really think we had to end the story anywhere. We had aliens arrive. We had a huge flood where I save everybody by taking a rope in my teeth and pulling this trailer through this flood while full of all these people and animals while I'm swimming. You know, it was all kinds of stuff like that. But then a publisher came up visiting us, and he saw that book and asked if he could publish it, and we said, well, why not? But we didn't have a title, so we showed it to a couple of our friends, and one of them was Terry Zwigoff, the friend who later made the Crumb film. And he read it, and he said, this is the most embarrassing thing I have ever read. It's just like hanging out your dirty laundry. I said, we have a title. So that was Dirty Laundry #1. And, we went on, it was fun to do, so we decided to keep working on them as well as doing our own work, so,
So, pretty much probably the first or second comic you guys drew together, by like the second or third panel, you're like on the floor doing it. And what kind of reaction did that get from like your friends and like people reading comics back then? Were people shocked, or was that just no big deal?
And in that time, like, it wasn't a big deal. Like, there was sex in all the comics and violence and people getting chopped up. There was S. Clay Wilson. There was, there was all kinds of stuff going on. And so I don't think it was very shocking. But some of the women thought it was like horrible that I would, draw myself with this.
Got you in a lot of trouble with the
because I was like with the male chauvinist pig, and I was catering to they thought, to his sexual fantasies. In fact, perhaps they were my own.
So also, a lot of times when you guys draw together, Robert kind of makes fun of your drawing style. But I somehow get the feeling that he likes your drawing style. And I was wondering, do you guys ever talk about who's going to draw what? Or, you also usually get the punchline. Is that just because you're the funnier of the two, or do you guys work that out ahead of time? How does that go?
I get the punchlines because I have the punchlines, because I'm funnier, yeah. And I'm faster, and he takes notes and I talk. And he has to draw the hard stuff because I can't draw it. And if you want a motorcycle or a car, you think, I'm going to draw that, And, if there's like a lot of buildings and stuff like that, or it has to be like straight and there's perspective, you want me to draw that, So it's kind of like works itself out. And in the end, it's like fair, I get the punchlines and he does the buildings and the cars, So it's all right.
And when was the first time, how old was Sophie when she first drew with you? And did that change, your approach at that point? Did you all of a sudden become aware that you were drawing each other, doing these explicit things, and now you have your daughter in the comic, or you didn't really care about that?
We started to worry about it a little bit, yeah, but I guess she was about 7 or 8 when she first appeared in Weirdo. And we never had heard any stories, of course, where there was explicit sex, but we started wondering what effect this weird work that we did would have on her ultimately. And I think it was hard for her, especially later on. And even now, in this book, Drawn Together, the recent book, the last story is a really disgusting story. Because after Robert did Genesis, the main critique he got of that book from the Crumb fans was that it was too clean and too, the Bible, for God's sakes. He's old, he's like drawing the Bible. So I said, Robert, I think we have to do a story to just show them that you haven't gone soft in the head. And so we did like senior sex, because what's more disgusting to young people than the thought of old people having sex, So we did like the most grotesque and graphic old people sex story that we could think of, and I really enjoyed it. And so it was really fun. But then my daughter, who's now 31, looked at it and she said, oh my God, I thought by now you'd at least be over this. I cannot believe you're still doing this to me. This is horrible. This is really disgusting. So obviously it's not easy for her, and I can't really say that, maybe I regret it, I'm not sure, but you have to do your work that you're compelled to do, and I feel bad that this has been a difficult struggle for her, although I don't think it's ruined her life or anything, but it's something she's had to deal with and still has to deal with.
So in the early days, you guys kind of just drew more autobiographical stuff. It didn't seem like you necessarily had stories. You were just drawing. And then later, I guess it was the New Yorker that kind of sent you on these adventures, and you started more, do you want to talk about your favorite strips, or the strip with your brother in it is very interesting, of course. And I like,
and
just
how
the
true that is, too.
Yes, I know. Firsthand, I know. And, but I also like, the trip to the tape factory is one of my favorites. I read that over and over and just
That's
fascinated by that tape dispenser.
Thank you. John, you're a good man.
Well, but, and also, I also just wanted to say, too, that I wasn't really offended by that comic strip you were referring to. I thought it was nice and romantic.
Which one?
Just the last one that you guys did, where you're having sex in the garden.
You think it was disgusting, the thought of it?
I thought it was nice that this couple that's been together for so long is still attracted to one another and having this little adventure.
Yeah, even if you're decrepit to everybody else.
Well, that's what happens. We get older, but, I thought it was nice.
Well, it's breaking some kind of barrier and taboo, I hope,
Well, what are your favorite comics that you guys did together? Do you have any that really stand out to you?
Well, it's different because in the beginning, as I said, it's very unself-conscious and just kind of stream of consciousness, meandering, and I don't think they hold together as storytelling in some ways. I think they like really go all over the place, and they're a little bit too loose maybe, but then there's that kind of craziness that lets anything happen, so there's a part of that I like. And on the other hand, the New Yorker, because they gave us assignments, and we were like, we'd put on our journalist hats or whatever, I felt like a reporter, and then you had like 3 pages where you have to fit everything in there. You have to say something. You're reporting on this event that they send you to, and then also you can't have fucking in it and stuff like that, and you can't say certain things, and you have to spell everything right, and they correct your punctuation and all that stuff like that. So that makes it like much more mainstream in a certain way, and yet having those restrictions was also interesting because, it really made you have to think and work hard to make a funny story with these severe limitations. And as you said, I think my favorite story, because it's such a nowhere story, is the story about the tape dispenser. Now, how could you write a romantic or meaningful story about a tape dispenser? But I think we did. And I think it's like a very nostalgic and actually moving story. And I won't tell you more, you have to buy the book and read it, but to me, the story about the tape dispenser is a deep philosophical story, and I like the fact that it's about the most mundane thing imaginable. And I found it romantic because I found the one gift that pleased my husband, and it was this tape dispenser. Because, he's a guy, the only thing you could ever get him normally would be an old 78 record. He never wants anything. But I found a gift that he really loved, and so it's kind of based on that. You'll have to read the story, and you can find out.
But it is related to records in that it's really, really helpful in packing those records, that dispenser. I love
Absolutely.
That
It's changed his life, he said,
So talk a little bit about your brother and your relationship with him, and specifically the comic that you did a few years ago. Well, you don't have to if you don't want to. No, but right. Certainly the comic
how can I sum this up? All right. My brother, it's my younger brother, and he doesn't live here anymore, so I guess I can talk about it. But, he's in France, and where we live, and we kind of take care of him. He was a drug addict for his whole life, and he's on medication now, and he's like, he's doing better, but he is a real character. I mean, if he was in Sopranos, he would fit in perfectly, and yet he lives in the south of France in my little village, and people don't know what to make of him at all. And when they ask him, like, well, what are you doing here? What do you do for a living? He says, I'm a retired professional golfer. It's like, okay, whatever. But he's really sleazy, and he's really a small-time hustler. And he hustles even though he doesn't have to. He has nothing to hustle about. We take care of him. He has absolutely nothing to worry about, but he still has to hustle. He has to wind you up and hustle you anyway. And he's really embarrassing for me. It's like, I thought I got out of Long Island, but this piece of Long Island followed me to my village in the south of France. I can never escape. And I hear stories like, someone will say to me, oh, I met your brother. He said the only reason you have any money is because he's your agent and he helped you earn all the money you have. I said, oh, that's interesting. You just hear all these things all the time come back to me, really embarrassing stuff. One time I went over to his house, and it was really cold out, and he was in his bikini underwear and a Guinea t-shirt, and he has electric heat, and it's really expensive. And I just said to him, gee, we're wearing heavy sweaters at our house. Do you think maybe you could just put a pants and his shirt on in the winter? And he begrudgingly did it. And then I went to the cafe the next day, and everyone was looking at me like really glaring at me. And I found out that he told everybody that my house was really warm and that I wouldn't let him have any heat on it. So he was freezing him out. He was complaining to everybody in the village because I made him put clothes on, So anyway, it's like I just have to live with that. It's like some kind of weird karmic thing that hangs over my shoulder, and for some reason, that's my lot in life, And I'm his keeper. That's all I can say. I'm my brother's keeper. But sometimes he does things that are so beyond the pale And this incident that I wrote about in Drawn Together in the last story called Dinner with Slacky, that's the character name we made up for him, was so embarrassing and so painful that I thought I'm either going to kill him or I have to write about it. So this story is a result of the most embarrassing and painful dinner I've ever experienced in my life.
Just one kind of a personal question, but the comic you did with Sophie and Robert, where you're run into the haunted house, you know, like you find the house and there's like the ghost.
Is that the one where we go to Minnesota? I mean, the one, the family reunion?
I don't think it's a family reunion.
No, I don't remember.
Okay, I was going to ask you if you really saw the ghost, but I
did. Well, I did really see the ghost. You know that. I saw the ghost, but that's not the ghost I was writing about in that story.
I didn't think so.
No, but I did see a ghost in our house later, as you know.
Right.
Yeah, no. Those houses, we live in a house from the 11th century, and you can ask John and Eden, who have been there. It's really spooky and strange. And all those houses are inhabited by other spirits because the stones have absorbed these lives over hundreds of years. And I did see a ghost in my house, and it was benevolent, fortunately. And I'm not a real big believer in this kind of stuff, so for me to say that, I'm not looking for that kind of stuff, and I'm not like all into that, so I was very matter-of-fact about it, but I really did see it, and it passed through the door, and it hovered a little bit over the ground, and it was dressed in something that looked like a blue burqa, kind of, and it's paused in the front room and then just went out the front door. Anyway, so whatever, but that is not the ghost I wrote about, though. Anyway.
So what do you think drawing these comics with your family, what effect has it had on your relationship with Robert and with Sophie for that matter too?
Well, I think it's kind of amazing to be able to live together and struggle through life together, and then also, express yourself together. I think it's something that has bonded us together in some very deep way. We're amazed that we can do it, and it's also extremely pleasurable. So, I don't think I won't say that it's like having sex, but there is something in the exchange part of it that's really deep on that level. So I feel that it's a great blessing to be able to do that, and I don't know why we can do it. At one time in the early days, we tried to get a bunch of other cartoonists where there are couples that both did cartoons to do stories for a book, for a Dirty Laundry style book, and nobody else could do it. They all ended up fighting and ripping up their stories, and it was a disaster. So and then I realized we're really blessed and lucky because we get to do this, and I think it's a little bit like, I always feel like we're channeling George and Gracie, when we do that, who I love so much. And I feel that, Robert puts out the straight lines and sets me up, and I take the falls, and we get into that character, and I feel somehow connected to that, and that it has to do with stand-up comedy and performance in a way. But I feel really blessed to be able to do that. It's very stimulating, and it's very revealing, because sometimes I read the stories, I learn things about a relationship that I was unconscious about. And Sophie
like
has
the jump seat?
Yeah, like the jump seat, like that. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. There's a story in the last part of this book also that is something that was revealed to me in this story, which was painfully embarrassing, and it changed something forever in a good way. So I'm not telling you more than that. But anyway, as far as Sophie drawing with us, I can't speak for her. I don't know how weird it is to be her and to be an artist and have us as parents. I think you'll have to get her here to talk about it because, I think it's hard for her. I mean, Robert and I drew as a refuge from our families. Sophie had to grow up with us as her parents, and she has to draw in spite of us. So it's completely different.
So do you have any feelings about the state of comics, or do you have any advice for like young cartoonists, like young women like yourself who want to draw comic books? Is it possible anymore to really put out comic books, or is there a future for the comic book industry?
Well, I think graphic novels are very successful and have developed amazingly. There's some great women out there: Alison Bechtel, Phoebe Glickner, Marjane Satrapi, lots of women doing really great stuff. Carol Tyler, but I also feel sorry for young women starting out now because things are real sewed up and it's really hard to find a publisher if you're not well known and you don't have an agent. It's the whole other ball game, whereas when we started, anybody could get published. So I think our generation was luckier in that way because you could work your way up. And now I don't know how young people get started, how they live, how they pay rent in New York and big cities, and how they manage to establish themselves and go on to get their work published. So I think there's a lot of good work out there, but I think it's harsher and harder, and the economics of the situation is really, really more difficult now. And publishing is, a dying empire in general because, I don't know how much longer books will even exist. I don't know. I hope they will, but so I think that, they're up against it now. So I don't know what the future will be.
Well, do you have any parting comments, or you'd like to open it up to some questions? If there's anything else you'd like to say about the book, it's 40 years of your work drawn together. It's pretty
The one thing I'd
incredible.
like to say about this book is that I think in the end it's a love story. I think it's actually, despite all the raunchiness and the crudeness and the slapstick stuff and everything, I think this is a 40-year love affair that, despite everything, has endured and has very rich. And I think it's very honest, and I think it's unique. So I hope you enjoy it. And if you have any questions, feel free.
Going back to kind of what you were saying at the end there about how it's become a lot more difficult for young people maybe get their work published and getting into the sort of system, so to speak. I'm curious because both tonight and in other interviews and things, you talked about, certainly Robert, like being first at doing this or the only ones to do that. How are you guys sure of that historically? Like there might be people out there who've done it, just didn't get their work published or couldn't get it out there. And has anyone come to you and been like, oh no, we did this too?
No one has, and I can't know everything. All I can tell you is that there's not. We've looked. Friends have looked. We're very aware of historical comics. We're pretty knowledgeable about what's out there and what's been published, and we've never found anything. We always look for it because we're curious. It's not like we want to say, oh, we're the only ones, but we have not found. We found cases where, like Melinda Gebbie and Alan Moore, one writes and one draws and things like that. But we've never found a situation where people write and draw themselves in an interactive way as we have done it. And even though we did it, I thought maybe other people would follow, but no one has. So it's as far as I know, but I mean, we have done a fairly exhaustive search. If you ever find it, get it to me. I'm really curious to see what someone would do. So.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
I have a question. Okay, that's a two-part question about France. I'm just curious, one, why did you decide to move to France? Had you visited a lot of times? Were you fluent French before you got there? And why was that, out of all the places to live, including in Europe, why did you choose that? And two, how is the audience different from America, where I know that you and Robert are very popular here, but it seems like, France, obviously they used to publish the Metal Verlant, Heavy Metal magazine, they have a lot of reverence for their talented artists there. Is it more of a respect as far as like just from a young age to older to respect the artist?
Okay, two-part question. First of all, we moved to France because of Laura Fountain, who's right there, our agent, because she was living in Paris. And I went over and house sat for her and spent time in Paris and brought my daughter there. And I really liked being there with my daughter. And I decided that I wanted to take my daughter out of America for a while and live somewhere else, that it would be a good challenge. And because Robert and I can live and work anywhere, I thought, why not? And I really did want to get out of America for a while at the time. So we moved over and we got an old house and decided we would fix it up and live there for a few years and then have a family meeting and decide what we would do. And after a few years, we decided to stay. And at the time that we left too, in the 80s, comics here were really down, and the publishing scene in Europe was much more happening in terms of comics. So it was a good place for us to be in terms of work as well. And comics have been a part of mainstream French publishing for a long time, and they are considered a serious art form, form of literature, and much more respected. And they do a really good job in doing really beautiful books and everything like that. And our work has been translated there. This book, actually drawn together, came out in France before it came out in America. And in France, it's called Parle-moi d'amour, Talk to Me of Love. So they saw it as a love story more than anything else. And, there's a lot of beautiful books, comics and graphic novels published in France, and I do think it's like they're more widespread in terms of having an influence on the culture, and it's considered a more serious art form, although here that it's developed in that direction more in the last 10 years, with the development of graphic novels and with mainstream publishers publishing graphic novels. It's changed here, but it started before in Europe, so. Anyway, and I didn't speak any French when I went to Europe, and I learned French in my village. And as my friend Laura told me tonight, I still speak French with a real New York accent.
Okay, there was another question back here.
Still in touch with the survivors of the original San Francisco scene?
Yeah, well, here's one right there. Yes, we're still good friends with Spain Rodriguez, and Laura is married to Gilbert Shelton, who also lives in France, so we're really good friends. And who else? Well, some people are no longer with us. Victor Moscoso we're still in touch with, and the Spiegelmans, and Bill Griffith, Diane Newman. Who else? Daniel Klaus is the next generation. We're in touch with, we know a lot of younger cartoonists also, and other generations of cartoonists. But yeah, it's kind of, we're still in touch.
I know they're still doing work.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So,
Any other questions? Yeah.
You talked about leaving Long Island and how glad, but would you say something about what it is you left and
Why I left?
What was there that you
fled from?
And how that sort of influenced your work?
I fled from rampant materialism, gone completely into the stratosphere. I grew up in the 5 towns, and the level of competition for stuff was so amazing that I found it daunting. Every single friend that I had in high school had a nose job. I'm the only one of the 15 girls that left that school with my nose intact. It was like such an extreme version of that worst, most upward striving, crass, materialistic thing that it blew my mind as a kid and always. Maybe I have an artistic soul. I don't know what it is, but I always thought it was just a horrible atmosphere. And I thought the people were pretty mean. And I felt really alone there, and even though I should have been one of them, I had everything the same as them, I just never felt like one of them, and I've been happier since I left there, although I love my family, and there's individual people that I love. In general, as a cultural milieu, for me, it was a really difficult place.
Your work schedule, your work day, do you have a regular schedule? Do you have a room of your own? How do you structure your day?
I have 2 rooms of my own. I have lots of room, but I'm really undisciplined. I have an art gallery in my village. I do a lot of work through the art gallery, helping other artists show their work and making money, because there's a lot of poor artists around there. I also teach yoga 3 days a week, and I study yoga as much as I can wherever I can. I go to Jiva Mukti when I'm here. And I work in spurts, of obsessional spurts. I'm not a person that works every day. And I have 2 grandchildren that I spend a lot of time with, too. I'm a very participatory grandparent. So, yeah. But when I get into a project, then I'll work like in a frenzy. And that's how I've always been, more or less. It's like you have a deadline, or you got to cram for exams, whatever. I get into a work obsession phase, and then I'll do a lot of work. And then sometimes I don't do anything. So that's me. I don't recommend it.
Okay, any other questions?
What's your work process like when you say that you're kind of get taken by a whim and you kind of have to go towards that, or you have a deadline and you're working towards it? But then as you're working, do you feel like you come into that with an idea, or do a lot of practices that you've developed over the years for brainstorming, or things that you do to draw ideas from your environment?
Well, I always keep a notebook, and I have way more ideas than I could ever draw. Like, if I had an inking slave, I'd be really productive. But actually, drawing the stories is time-consuming, you know. But, I mean, I just have so many ideas, like, every second. And, you know, Robert tries to write fast enough to get the ideas down. And I have, you know, a long-term book idea that I'm working on. And, you know, it stews for a long time, and I kind of put it together in a very sort of montage kind of way, you know. It develops in layers. But I get a seed of an idea, and then it starts to grow, and I write first, and, you know, it's complicated. But I'm working on a book that'll take me forever to do. I hope I don't die before I finish it, but I don't know. It depends. The grandchildren are taking up a lot of work. But mostly it comes from writing down ideas. And then once you draw comics for a long time, you start to see everything as a comic. It's really hard not to see things as a comic. Like, I have to stop sometimes looking at people and thinking about it, because everything becomes a comic, you know, and it's hard to, like, filter out what you can actually ever do, you know. You only have one life and two hands, you know, so that it's actually a process of elimination to get down to what it is you can actually have time to do and what will be the best idea.
You're constantly adding to your seed notebook, as it were. Like, and you're just take a seed idea and, like, let it grow and see where it takes you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anybody else? Going once? Yeah.
Have there been any more film offers, like after Terry's movie?
We say no to all film. We're not movie stars. We're not actors, you know.
You don't want to make the Drawn Together the musical?
Why not? No.
Could be good.
The Broadway show? Broadway show? Yeah, yeah.
No underwear movies, or?
That's not us. That's her husband.
Yeah, I know.
No.
As for based on the work, not on the.
Robert hates Hollywood. Doesn't want to have anything to do with it. You know, he's becoming crankier and crankier. He's like, you know, more and more like cranky Mr. Natural as he gets older. No, he's not doing it.
What about music? You were playing some of the Confessions documentary?
Not me. Oh, I'm like a trained chimp. I could play 4 chords on the guitar, but I don't play too much. But Robert plays with John and Eden. They play a lot, and they come to France in the summer, and they played a lot this summer, and it was great. So, and he does their CD covers, and John has to be like an indentured record servant to make up for the art after.
It's a living. So are you going to sign some books now?
Yes. Okay. All right.
Well, Aline Kominsky-Crumb, everybody.
Okay.